This is James Arnold Taylor, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Welcome to a more civilized podcast. This is the podcast you're looking for. You may not go about your business. Stay here, listen, and then move along.
Welcome, listeners, dear beloved listeners, to episode 12 of our podcast. We're going to try to classify Star Wars today. Should be interesting.
Yeah.
Who are you? I am your lovely host, Kyler.
I am your not so lovely host, Chris.
I'm the one everyone loves. I'm Ross.
There we go.
Nice to know.
Oh, and Ross, you have some announcements. Some fun announcements.
My gosh.
Yeah.
So much exciting things.
Let's announce.
So much excite. Much wow.
So,
yes.
Remember how a couple weeks ago...
So excited I forgot the finer points of grammar.
Remember how a couple weeks ago we were talking about the new upcoming Star Wars series?
I do remember.
And if you're listening to these podcasts in order, we've talked about one last time in our Nerf Nugget, Resistance. We're now going to talk about the other one because a set photo has been released for The Mandalorian,
yes.
which is Jon Favreau's live-action Star Wars TV series.
Oh my gosh.
And actually, I think there have been...
so that is a TV series?
Yes.
I thought he was doing a series of movies.
It's like a mini-series. It's like going to be like 12 episodes or something like that.
Well, that's intriguing.
But,
I thought it was going to be a regular...
No.
Oh, that'll be cool.
Well, we're all learning things today,
Yeah.
except for Kyler.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because I know everything about Star Wars.
Now, I want to say the last time we talked about this, they had some like leaked backstage photos.
Yeah.
If I remember right, because we were talking about them briefly. Because they, when they released, people were saying, "Oh, it's Tatooine," and I was like, I mean, it's definitely deserty, but
it's desert, which could be.
Well, and my big
Tatooine,
thing
could be Jakku,
was
could
that
be anyone.
Could be Jeddah.
Could be Jeddah. Yeah.
The reconstructed Jeddah.
Well, the thing, I'm actually agreeing now that it's Tatooine, seeing actually this other photo that was released.
Yeah,
so
I have seen that.
The backstage photos were, I mean, you had a bunch of these adobe buildings, but they had flat roofs where Tatooine at least
has domes.
A lot of domes, at least. But
Mos Eisley had domes.
So did the Homestead, though.
so did Mos Espa.
Did Mos Espa?
It had some, at least.
Okay.
It wasn't unilaterally.
I wasn't sure.
There were some flat roofs, too, in both of them. But
Right.
But predominant architecture is domed.
Right. And these were very much flat roofed. In fact, they even had a different color on them. I think the one I'm thinking in particular was kind of a reddish roof, kind of flat roof on it. Anyway, so I wasn't thinking it was that because of that different architecture, but then now this new set photo of a Mandalorian walking kind of menacingly down this alleyway street thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's so good.
It does look more like Tatooine. There's a moisture evaporator there, which is very typical Tatooine. Which, again, I mean,
could
sure.
be any desert planet. They all need to to moisturize their evaporators.
But from a visual arts standpoint and working in these sorts of things, usually they try and keep things that look the same on the same planet.
yeah, they try to make things architecturally and visually distinct.
Right.
Yeah.
And so things that you've seen on Tatooine, if you see them again, they'll probably still be on Tatooine. Even if it's another desert planet like Jakku, the moisture evaporators, while you can probably tell they're probably the same thing, will look different.
And I frankly don't even care where it is. It looks so good.
Yeah, it looked really good.
It's they've got Game of Thrones money per episode. It's around $10 million per episode.
That's
Dang.
nice.
So I imagine this is going to be essentially like the Sherlock Holmes.
Like Sherlock with the
Sherlock, where it's essentially it's a TV show, but it's basically a movie.
Yeah, it's
every
a couple
episode.
movies.
Right.
Yeah.
So give me 10 or 12 movies of a Mandalorian. I am down.
Yeah.
I am super down with that.
Normally I'd just be like, yeah, we'll see. But Jon Favreau, that's a good name to have attached.
And this, I didn't realize this, but he voices a Mandalorian in the Clone Wars. Pre Vizsla.
Yeah.
Which I didn't ever make that connection before. But so I'm like, if anybody's going to do a Mandalorian, let a previous butt-kicking Mandalorian do it.
Yeah.
So, but they're beautiful. It's kind of, so the Mandalorian, if you haven't seen the picture, it's kind of a darker metal with a lot of browns and grays in there. Mm-hmm. It looks really, really good. I noticed the chest centerpiece is a little bit different shape.
Is it? Mm-hmm. I was actually looking too much at the helmet.
Yeah, the helmet is a little bit different than Boba Fett's.
Antenna. Yeah.
There's no antenna without time, but it's more rounded. The whole thing is more rounded.
And also, partially, I wonder if, to me, it almost looks like that helmet was painted on, was airbrushed on later. It's like everything else looks real to me, but for some reason the helmet looks like a really good matte type painting.
See, you're an artist though, so you notice stuff like that. Dumb people like me, wouldn't have been able to
it's
tell
very
the
well
difference.
done.
I'm going to take a moment to say to the person listening to this and going, oh my gosh, they're debating about minute details of this Mandalorian's armor. You're listening to a Star Wars podcast. Yeah, that's what they're doing.
Not just anyone, but this podcast. I think we said at the very beginning, we're going to get into the weeds on this kind of stuff. So but also, speaking of minutia, over the left shoulder of the Mandalorian in the picture, and I'm doing this from memory, by the way.
I'm pulling it up right now.
There is a beautiful stock, the butt of a rifle.
Oh, yeah.
Of a laser rifle there that's made of wood. It's wooden. It looks gorgeous, so I can't wait to see that out and shooting things. It's going to be just beautiful. It looks really, really great. The idea, I'm paraphrasing Jon Favreau here, but he says basically the show is going to be called The Mandalorian, or at least that's the tentative title.
Yeah.
But it's going to follow this lone gunfighter around the Outer Rim as he sort of does lone gunfightery things.
I like lone gunfighters.
It's going to be set, I believe, 3 years after the Fall of the Empire and Return of the Jedi. So he says it's specifically after the Fall of the Empire, but before the Rise of the First Order. So as the New Republic is sort of getting its feet under itself, which is why he's out in the Outer Rim, because there's no law out here, and the Empire's not a thing anymore.
There already
the
wasn't
Republic.
much, and now there's even less.
Yeah, exactly. So he can just sort of go and do his gunfighter thing. Cool. And actually, I shouldn't be using the he pronoun because we don't actually know if the protagonist is male or female.
Correct. Yeah, that would be awesome.
So the protagonist, it looks pretty stocky.
Build is very
the build
male.
looks masculine, which is why I assumed, but who knows? We'll see.
Yeah.
But anyway, it sounds awesome, and the picture just makes me so excited because you can tell the quality is not your average TV show
nice
quality. Like,
yeah.
it looks Star Wars movie, full-on Star Wars budget quality.
That was the big thing that stuck out to me, is it does not look like a regular TV series. I mean, it's very, very well lit.
It very much looks like they have Disney
I didn't
money
know anything
behind it.
about this, and I just assumed it was a movie photo.
Yeah.
I didn't...
It's... Yeah, you look at the picture and you're going, yep, there is Disney money behind this. And lots of it. Yeah. So Ross has pulled up the picture here.
He's got a piece of the Triforce on his hand. That's nice.
Yeah, I wondered about that. He's got a cool, like, kind of like Chewie's bandolier with, like, the ammo in it. He's got a cool belt like that. You've got some, like, canopy tents behind him, kind of like Agrabah, street hawkers selling
This looks
their
a lot
stuff.
more gray, though. It doesn't feel very Tatooine-ish to me.
Yeah, and that's, I don't know.
Especially with the series of canopies across the top there.
Yeah.
You don't see that a lot on
But look at the
almost
stock of that rifle,
Firefly-ish.
though. It's so cool looking. You can actually see the wood grains in the rifle.
That almost looks like antler or something.
Yeah,
that would be
it's pretty cool.
You did see in episode 1, actually I think it might have been in one of the deleted scenes, the lady that tells Annie to get home quick, a storm's coming. She had a little, like, cloth.
She does have a canopy, but I'm talking about you got a couple in a row here across the street.
Well, actually, no, a lot in episode 1 they did. That whole bazaar that they walked through where Jar Jar
that's fair.
Eats the thing.
Yeah.
And,
which is actually
gets
in
beat up by
Resistance.
Sebulba. Is that?
Just looking at
that
this,
little front thing.
looking at this image, though, I think I would personally put my money on not Tatooine. Looking at that,
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
so
We'll see.
That could be fun.
And again, like I said, I don't care where the show happens.
Yeah.
I just want to see this.
I just want a solid story.
Mandalorian doing its thing.
I was wondering if it might be more something like Anchorhead, a place that we've heard about but haven't seen.
Ooh, that could be cool.
That could be a lot of fun.
Because, I mean, that would still give you the similar design language of the rest of Tatooine, but give you a new area.
I'm going to sidetrack just for half a second.
How
I wish
dare
they
you.
would. I know, right?
We never let you sidetrack. None of us ever sidetrack anywhere.
So
there was this one time that I thought about sidetrack.
sidetrack. There it is. Oh, Inception. No, I wish they would do this more, though, with some of the new movies, and they did this in Solo with Corellia, take these places that have been mentioned and then show us, rather than creating stuff out of whole cloth.
Right.
They did that a lot in the Legends canon, and I think that's part of why they're kind of like, let's mix in the newer one where they're like, we're going to show some
like
new places because
Rogue
they
One,
got...
for example, like, we have Wobani, we have the Rings of Kafrine or whatever it is. Like, we have a whole bunch of completely new places.
Yep, that was one of my complaints about that intro.
I wish that they... Like, and that's what I'm hoping that this show does, is say, okay, we've mentioned Anchorhead on Tatooine. Maybe it is there. Like, that would be really cool to get some flesh on these bones that we've heard about.
Yeah.
You know,
And the synopsis that we've been given so far specifies that he's on the Outer Rim.
yeah.
Which obviously Tatooine's out there, but like
And
it's
where
going
it's
to
a
be
TV show, there's room for him to go and visit a lot
Right.
of these Outer Rim places, which would be way cool.
So I think that's what we'll see.
Do you know where it's filming? Do either of you know where they're filming?
No.
I'm gonna look that up because I want to know. That's
I heard that they had gone back to some original shoot locations.
Had they?
But, yeah, but some of these locations have been like double dipped. Like they went to one shoot location that that serves as both Tatooine and Jeddah, and so it's like it could be.
Well, because I remember reading something that they had gone and used a particular sound stage that Star Wars had used. But
Right,
I mean, it's a
but
sound
again, but it's a
stage.
sound
Yeah.
stage. That to me, that doesn't hold almost any water at all.
It's not saying anything.
Yeah,
But.
but no, I had heard a rumor, and this is complete rumor. I have no corroborative evidence for this at all. But yeah, I had heard that they had gone to a location that had served as Tatooine and Jeddah for like the Junland Waste, where it's kind of rocky and sandy.
Oh, okay.
And so it's like, well, it could be Tatooine, could be Jeddah, could be another
Right.
planet entirely. Like, who knows? And then, yeah, looking at the picture, Chris was right. There's too much gray in the buildings. The Tatooine buildings are kind of
very-
yellowy
yeah.
a little bit, like a yellowish brown. And these ones are more kind of like a dirty white, dirty gray, kind of like a light gray. But so like it could be anywhere. Who knows?
What do you find?
Chris, what do you have for us?
okay. So I'm looking at this is Polygon.com has an article that is talking about everything that we know so far
Yes.
about the Mandalorian, and they have been updating it as they go. And I cannot find where is it set? We don't know yet. I'll find where it's filming. Dang it. When is the shutdown? Yeah, I'm not finding it. But the thing that had me there is they're talking about the producers, the people attached to this, in addition to Favreau, Dave Filoni, Kathleen Kennedy, and Colin Wilson, executive producing. We've got Karen Gilchrist as a co-executive producer lined up to direct episodes.
Oh yes, yeah, the directors.
Yeah.
Are
these are
Deborah
cool.
Chow, who has directed for Jessica Jones and Mr. Robot, that's a nice pedigree there. A nice resume would be a better way of putting that. Rick Famuyiwa, I apologize, Rick, if I really butchered that, from Dope and Confirmation. Bryce Dallas Howard
Yeah.
of Jurassic World most recently.
Well, she was an actor there, but I guess she's
she's done some good.
she's done directing on some other films as well.
And then Taika Waititi. Waititi.
Now I'm
of
so excited for.
Thor Ragnarok, What We Do in the Shadows, and Hunt for the Wilder People.
Yeah. Have you seen that one?
I love Hunt for the
it's
Wilder
an
People,
amazing
yeah.
movie.
Yeah, my sister's a big Taika Waititi fan, and she hooked me up with those.
Yeah, so the overall feeling we're getting from all the news surrounding Mandalorian is they're not messing around.
Yeah.
Like,
No,
they've
they're
pulled
not.
out the big guns for directors,
Favreau
for
said
producers.
for Aliens, he's planning on using the same motion capture tech they used for the Jungle Book. That's cute.
Yeah, it's going to be I'm really excited. And again, this will air next fall 2019. And the rumor is the more on the probably true side of rumor is that it's going to be airing on Disney's new streaming service.
There are also reports that some filming is being done in a coastal location.
Ooh, coasts. That means it must be.
That
on
narrows
Jeddah.
down a good.
on
that
Scarif.
narrows down a
Scarif.
good chunk of our of the planet. If there's a coastal locations, we're down to 40% of the planet.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean it could be, and I hope you're right though, because it says it's set in the Outer Rim. I hope that we get to see more of the Outer Rim, because it's like, guys, there's more to the Outer Rim than Tatooine and Mustafar. Like,
Yeah.
So I hope that we do get to explore some of these other regions that we've heard about.
Mandalore would be a potential awesome
I would
thing
love
to see.
to see live action Mandalore.
Was that an Outer Rim territory?
I
thought that was
don't
mid-rim,
think so. I think
wasn't it?
Mandalore's. I could be wrong. I believe Mandalore's mid-rim, but we can.
Well, just because he wanders the Outer Rim doesn't mean he can't leave the Outer Rim.
right, and go back.
Firefly is generally doesn't go in towards the more populated Alliance-held planets, but they did on Persephone, so it's always an option.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll admit, when it was first announced...
Oh, it is in the Outer Rim. Mandalore is the Outer Rim.
Oh,
Wow.
Yeah, I was going to say, I could have sworn one of the games put that forth, but
Yeah.
I'm like, that's not canon.
According to
official.
Wikipedia, the source of all knowledge and truth, Star Wars, it is located in the Outer Rim, the Mandalore sector, region, Outer Rim territories.
There we go. When it was first announced that there was going to be a TV series, I was nervous like a live action thing, because they just never look as good as the movies, you know.
Yeah, it's hard to do.
And all of
but
that.
these days, television does not mean what it used to. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, if they're doing it more miniseries instead of a seasoned TV show,
I would love for it to turn into a seasoned TV show if they keep up the same budget.
I would be okay with it. Yeah, if they take like the British model, like the Sherlock model, even though yes, you have to wait forever between episodes.
I would rather wait for quality.
Yeah. Well, and I'd say it's
fine.
Game of Thrones that's really making this as a possibility for a lot of.
Yeah,
they're looking at that as something they're willing to do.
And what I mean by BBC style listener is that they tend to do series when they feel like it rather than on a schedule.
Yeah.
So I mean, some of the more popular ones like Doctor Who, they're coming out basically every year. But like Sherlock, you would do. I think they had the first like 2 seasons were back to back, then they were off for a couple of years, and then did season 3.
Well, and Sherlock was really just Stephen Moffat's pet project. Like, hey, I need to blow off steam between Doctor Who episodes.
Yeah.
I kind of want to do this. And part of the reason it kept getting delayed is because Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman became such big names that it's like, well, we can only film whenever they're available, and that is never.
Yeah.
We will be able to find a point where we can get both of the two of them on set long enough to film some things roughly sometime between 2020 and never.
Yeah.
Because wasn't series 4 of Sherlock, wasn't that like 3 years waiting or something like that?
Yeah, something like
It was
that.
stupidly long. Yeah.
But it was good.
And it was worth it. I mean, definitely.
So yeah, I would be okay with them returning to this Mandalorian series or different series altogether every couple of years when they have a good idea that is actually solid. Because I would rather quality over quantity and quality over rapidity. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like over getting it quickly,
I always agree on that.
Like if it's gonna if Mandalore comes out or the Mandalorian comes out next year, let's say, fine, awesome, okay. And if you wait 5 years before you have another live-action TV series, fine. As long as that 5 years has been spent on a good story, on interesting characters, you know.
Yep.
I would much rather wait for good Star Wars than have the franchise ruined by just pushing it out for pushing it out.
Executive meddling and deadlines have ruined a lot of projects in
history.
history.
My band's name in college.
Executive meddling.
Jeez. Oh shoot! All right. Well, I think that's it for the news. Yeah? Okay, great. We can get on to the meat of this episode. I'm not sure how long this is going to take. We were talking about this before we recorded that none of us are entirely sure this is going to be a terribly long episode, but I think it's a discussion
we actually
still worth having.
combined a couple different ideas and had similar things.
Or it could go on forever, depending on how philosophical
it
we
could,
start getting.
which we can wax philosophical if we need to, but I think...
I've been watching The Good Place, so I'm an expert in philosophy now.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that show's forking hilarious.
It is.
Man. So I think I think the better topic to address first would be, is this sci-fi or is it fantasy?
That is a great place to start. So, let's start with some definitions. That's how I like to
we got to
debate.
define our terms, as we historians say.
Science fiction, generally speaking, is Asimov's house. I mean, obviously, plenty of people. Mary Shelley. Let's start with Mary Shelley is the inventor of science fiction. I actually saw a joke on the internet that I'm going to share with you all because I enjoyed it. It's like every now and then I feel like I can't really do anything, but then I figure that, you know what, if Mary Shelley can freaking invent science fiction to win a short story contest with Lord Byron, you know, maybe I can get home on time from work. Some to that effect. And so Mary Shelley deserves a good chunk of the credit for inventing, if not all of the credit for inventing science fiction, where we're going to look at science as it exists right now, and we're going to attempt to extrapolate the future versions of what we might discover or create or build, or any variation on what the future might look like, and we are going to write stories set in that possible future. And a lot of stories drastically miss the mark of what the future is going to look like. A lot of them hit surprisingly close on certain aspects. Nobody gets 100% ever. And some don't even really try.
Well, and some flat out inspire the future.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
Thinking specifically of Star Trek, Next Generation, you see Picard always tapping away on a little flat, rectangular
Tablets,
pad.
yeah.
And that was literally the inspiration for the iPad.
Yeah.
Where they were like, let's see if we can make that.
That is another way
holding.
that science fiction influences the world. Yeah.
The original Star Trek series, they had little
yeah.
handheld communicators.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's crazy too. I had to replace my phone recently, and so I was at the phone store.
Oh, you did, didn't you? Oh, sure enough.
My phone started, my phone started wigging out. It was like it was having serious issues.
Yeah, I'm getting close.
And anyway, so you go to replace it, and I was looking at the watch phones that they had, Apple and otherwise. Yeah. And I was just sitting here thinking, holy crap. I remember as a kid watching Star Trek or whatever and seeing them do or James Bond, whispering into his watch because it's really a telephone, and thinking, boy, that'd be the day, wouldn't it? That'll never happen, but boy, that'd be such a crazy world that we would live in if that was real. And holy crap, that is real. That's a thing that exists.
Well, and the funny thing about that, too, is that for a lot of people, the watch phone itself isn't more convenient than the cell phone that most people use. In fact, it's actually drastically less convenient in a lot of ways, loses a lot of its functionality. So a large part of the reason that all that exists is so that people can pretend they're in the science fiction stories or spy stories that they love. It's basically is the world conforming itself to art.
Yep.
Art influences the world influences art, and it's the everlasting circle. So, science fiction, is based on extrapolating potential futures and telling stories set in those potential futures.
Exactly.
Or it can be set anywhere from like a very near future where it's based functionally our world but with slightly better technology, or it could be such a distant future that there's no way to really connect this, or it could be a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Maybe.
Mm-hmm. And the other, another aspect of it, I guess, but I mean, I think that is definitely the primary definition of science fiction, what Chris just said.
Yeah.
I think another sort of sub-definition or tangentially related to that anyway is the idea that in a lot of science fiction, a lot of the plot or the characters or whatever, a lot of focus in general is devoted to the technology displayed itself.
Yeah.
So I think like Minority Report, for example, is science fiction.
Yeah.
And the whole plot revolves around this futuristic technology of precognition, predicting where people are going to be making crime.
A good chunk of it is, what if we had this, or wouldn't this be neat?
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
And so the whole story sort of hinges on this futuristic technology.
Yeah.
Every episode of Star Trek, it seems, is focused on one element of the Star Trek's technology or another,
Yes.
And a lot of it is, how can we adapt the technology that we currently have to meet this problem? Or, it's very much focused on the technology and the technology seems to be the focus in, or iRobot, right? The focus is on the android technology, and it's taking over in this massive computer system, and that's what the plot hinges on, is this technology, and that seems to be.
To be fair, I'm going to segue slightly into fantasy and our definition of that to set up it, because you can do similar things with fantasy as well. So fantasy, there have been stories throughout history that would fit well into what we consider now fantasy. But as far as the genre or modern idea of what a fantasy story is, that's basically built by Tolkien and Robert Howard with the Conan books. So you get Conan the Barbarian and Lord of the Rings created modern fantasy such as we know them, and so you've got generally it might be set in our world, it might be set in some adjacent world like the Narnia, or it might be set in a world that is completely unrecognizable to ours. It's just its own place. All sorts of variations, but generally fantasy is built on magic.
The supernatural, I would say.
Yeah, the supernatural. Yeah, there's some form of magic or supernatural that is not. We're not attempting to extrapolate from known science. We're attempting to just build something neat because wouldn't it be cool? We've got magic rings that contain part of the soul of a demigod, and everybody wants it because yay, power. It's like we've got, and that runs the gambit from in modern days, you've got stories that are very in fantasy, the fantasy genre. You've got low fantasy and high fantasy, which is not a like class segregation like it sounds, but is really just speaking of how much magic is there.
Yeah.
Like high fantasy is magic is everywhere. It's ubiquitous.
It's your
Everybody.
Tolkien, It's your Wheel of Time.
It's your Tolkien
Harry
Wheel of
Potter.
Time. It's anything Brandon Sanderson ever writes.
Yeah.
Whereas low fantasy is, there is magic, but it's not a huge shaping force in the world. Like, it does shape things, but it's in the background, or it only is very
what are
rare.
some examples of that?
So that would be Game of Thrones is
Okay.
often like a Game of Thrones becomes slightly higher fantasy as it goes along, as the dragons are born and grow up, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
But it's a primarily straightforward political.
But
medieval...
he basically took the War of Roses and said, hey, let's stick a little bit of magic here and there. So when you compare that to a Brandon Sanderson novel or something, the sheer amount of magic is vastly different between the two. And so that's generally how it's described. As low magic is basically mostly our world with some magic, and high fantasy is going into what else can we create? Let's just really get out there. And Stormlight Archive, we've got this world that is just besieged by a storm that goes by like clockwork, and everything about this world's economy and its ecology has all been shaped by these constant horrendous storms that hit them, and it's neat, and magic is everywhere and everybody's using it. And so fantasy gets into that. So you can do a similar thing with fantasy as you've done with sci-fi, where it's like, hey, what if magic, Mistborn, what if someone had the power to ingest metal and then burn it as fuel inside them to produce a specific magical effect depending on what metal they're using? And hey, what could I do with that? And that would be fun.
Which is such a cool idea. Good job, Brandon.
Yes, but yeah, and there's a lot of magics that are fantasy stories that are basically just what if we could do this? How would this affect? Let me tell a story set in that, and where the magic is very much like anyone who's picking up Brandon Sanderson books. Generally, the magic is if not the central focus of these stories. Mm-hmm. Strong characters, great fun, all of that, but the magic is definitely occupying a place right next to them. Similar to how technology can in sci-fi. Yeah. So you can do that with both of them. It's not a huge divide. Basically, the difference between them usually is there is at least some scientific principle or pseudo-scientific explanation for what is going on with the sci-fi. And in fantasy, we're not attempting that. Magic is extra normal, and that's fine.
Yep.
And it does get very blurry sometimes, because if you get, it's Arthur C. Clarke's first law is I apologize if I butcher this, but basically any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Yeah. Like, if it's so advanced that we cannot understand how it operates with our current functioning, our current understanding of science, like say a lightsaber, which is utterly impossible by any metric in what we've got. Then it's but then it's functionally no different than magic. Like, it might as well just be magic.
Well, and that's interesting too, because I think in what is pretty inarguably a science fiction universe like Star Trek, I think about the teleporter technology, or the transporter technology. Excuse me.
The transporters are teleporters. But
yes, they are, but they're called transporters. So I'm going to get this right. But I think about that, right? Yeah. I mean, that's pretty magical when you think about it. That, Chris, you're over here, and then we're going to have some shimmery music, and then you're going to be over here with some shimmery music. Yep. You know, that's pretty magical. But rather than a fantasy setting where they just say, "Well, that's magic.
Yeah,
you teleported. Congratulations, you do magic."
Yep.
In Star Trek, they say, we're going to, pseudoscience, because it's not actually a thing we can do yet.
Yep.
But here's the quote-unquote, air quotes, science behind the transporter is we're going to disassemble you and then reassemble your parts over here, and, blah, blah, blah. Here's our scientific explanation for why this is happening. And that, to me, that's what makes Star Trek science fiction and not fantasy, because they take
how they're explaining the ability.
They take those
to do
supernatural abilities and they say, we're going to give you some scientific, quote unquote, reasons behind it.
But that is an interesting gray area that you get when you look at these, is that really certain aspects of Star Trek are no more scientific than anything in Star Wars.
Yes.
It's just that, but nobody questions Star Trek's status as science fiction.
Right.
Because there is enough Well, I'm sure there's someone
I was
somewhere.
saying, because I actually thought I heard this debate.
I was going to say, we
once
should
upon
start a
time.
real fight and tell
There's
people that
someone
Star Trek
listening
is fantasy.
Yeah, someone listening to us is a really hardcore sci-fi nerd. So science fiction too. I should say that within the genre, the terms I generally hear are soft science fiction and hard science fiction. So
Just like your high fantasy and low fantasy.
Yeah, exactly. And soft science fiction is, we're not really that concerned with the actual science. It's just set in the future. And, there's variations on how there's a spectrum there where it's like, yeah, we're going to hand-wave transporter technology and this and that. And warp drives, as such as they exist, as far as we understand right now, would not actually work. But sure, they found out a way to create a drive that creates faster than light travel. Cool. We're good there. But then other things that they are doing in the show are based off of no, we're actually researching how a planet like this would function and what that would, what that gravity would do to someone who goes down there and does this and this. And we're trying to get the science of it right. Whereas in Star Wars, there's definitely an approach of just
whatever.
Rule of cool. If it's cool enough, do it. And if the science is right, hey, that's nice. And if it's not, oh well. Coruscant could not function as an actual planet covered in an entire city. It just wouldn't work. But yeah, it's
cool. So
they figured out a way to do it. Isn't that neat? Their universe does not function like ours. Whatever. But yeah, that's
a galaxy far, far away. So maybe things are different.
So if Star Wars is science fiction, it's definitely on the soft end of things. Right. Whereas you get into hard science fiction, which you're more into your Heinleins and your Asimovs and stuff, where this is a lot more precise with a lot of things. And there's probably someone listening to me that's just like, Heinlein and Asimov. Are you kidding me? They're
nothing compared to the fanfic I've written.
There's that too. And that, there's a spectrum. Some people have different tastes, and there's a lot of people that just no, I want really hardcore, well-researched science. And so you've got a spectrum there. You've got stories that are so thoroughly precise in their science and their speculation on what that science could evolve into, that your average reader is going to go, oh, wow, this is boring.
Yeah.
It's too dense. It's too much. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's a spectrum.
There's a happy medium, you gotta find.
Because incidentally, the article I did just find as you were talking, apparently the science fantasy article on Wikipedia claims that Star Trek is often cited as science fantasy.
Yeah. That's right.
Which is odd.
The glove has been thrown down.
It has, yeah. I mean, I would put it in the science fiction category.
I would say...
To me it feels like science fiction. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sorry, yeah.
So science fantasy is a popular term for basically something that is so soft sci-fi, or is that it's basically just fantasy cloaking itself in a veneer of sci-fi futurism. So there's not any actual official magic, but there is the Force, there is Vulcan mind melds, there is all these sort of things that it's sure, pseudo-psychic mumbo-jumbo. So it's, the Force is functionally in a lot of ways, it's a magic system.
Well, speaking of the Vulcan mind meld, though, we humans cannot mind meld.
Yes.
However, maybe there is a species out there in the stars who possesses that ability, so maybe that is still then scientifically
but again,
possible.
It's not something that's based off of, we have research into how the mind works, that if you expanded it in this way, maybe you could do this. It's just pure, hey, we don't understand everything.
Here you go.
Maybe it could happen. You can't say it can't.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, and I in my mind, I put them in the two separate categories completely. I don't even do the science fantasy. For me, Star Trek, for example, is science fiction. It hinges on technology in pretty much every episode. The show tries to explain its own magics like transporters in a scientific way in its approach, and it does ask you to suspend your disbelief in the we don't have this technology ... yet, but we could maybe have it. And frankly, iPads are proof of that concept. That we didn't have it in the 90s and the late 80s when Star Trek Next Generation was on, but now we do, and it was directly inspired by that, so maybe we will have transporters someday.
See, but I would point out, in the case of Star Trek, which we're talking about Star Trek a lot for this episode, that a lot of the tech in Star Trek, like communicators, all these things, they're not things that they really delved into in the show, how does this work? And this could... It's just set dressing. to the stories that are actually happening. It's we need a way for them to communicate over long distance even when they're not next to a landline.
Right.
So we're going to say, sure, they've got these mobile phone things. We'll call them communicators. Yeah. And it's a plot device, not a... And it ended up coming true. Yeah. And people saw that and went, man, that would be nice, and I'm going to make this. Or we're like, well, I'm already working on something that's going that direction. So yeah, good guess.
Yeah.
But it's not a core of the show.
And then for me, obviously, Star Wars is fantasy. It is fantasy that takes place in space.
Yeah, which is why
but it's a fantasy. Yeah. It's a fantasy story at its heart.
Yeah. Right.
And it just the setting happens to be outer space occasionally.
Yeah. See, and for me, I like the term science fantasy just because there's enough of it out there to kind of make it. Yeah, this is its own genre. It's handy to have a term for it because it's like, yes, it's essentially fantasy, but we're doing it's sci-fi in appearance at least. And I like having a term for that because usually when people are like, oh, fantasy, they go Lord of the Rings or they go, they go Rick Riordan or Harry Potter. Hey, there's that too. That's a big...
And I usually mention Star Wars at that point just so that I can get them to raise their eyebrows and then I can talk about Star Wars.
Yeah, that's right.
You crafty devil.
But so where it's like, and they've got, different like urban fantasy for something that's set in our world, and then they've got all sorts of definitions there, but I like having science fantasy as it looks like sci-fi, but it's essentially fantasy.
Right. So you put Star Wars then in science fantasy.
I would, and for me the distinction between Star Wars and Star Trek on that, because I would put Star Trek in the soft science fiction category, as opposed to science fantasy, because they're at least making some significant efforts. Like, I have no doubt, no offense to the people making Star Wars, I'm sure there are some efforts going on to be like, well, how would this work and stuff? It happens. There are creators somewhere doing that. But it's definitely not a primary focus, and it's not the overriding goal.
And I would say it's not even that high of priority.
Exactly.
It looks cool.
It's not, no executive at Disney is going, but wait, is that possible? If anyone's doing that, it's the writers, it's the authors, it's people going, well, wait, do I want to have that? Because, man, that's pretty egregiously non-realistic.
And they do sometimes retcon things, like the World War II type fighter flying of the fighters in space shouldn't be possible, right? Because you need thrusters and control surfaces and things. Well, that's what the World War II, what it would need in atmosphere, but we don't have an atmosphere in space, but it still looks like it. They show quite prominently in, I think it was... Last Jedi, there are some actual other thruster.
Yeah, when Poe comes in to land on the Raddus. And his retro thrusters kick in, and
and it's as he's landing.
I like that shot. That was a good.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool one.
Yeah,
and so I mean,
that's how I used to park my car in high school when I get home.
So then, were you done with your point, by the way?
No, you're good. You're great. I don't.
So at what point do they try to explain things and it jumps genre?
See. Yeah, that's for me is
this episode.
The difference for me.
We're going to come to a conclusive
in Star Wars.
Definition.
That is a very minor effort. It's a background thing. Nobody's pointing to those thrusters and explaining how they work or anything, or even technobabbling how they work.
Well, I'm even thinking
technobabble, if you're not familiar, is we're going to pretend that this is actual science, but we're just spewing a bunch of words to make it sound.
Yeah, see, and Star Trek does that frequently.
Star Trek is the unmitigated king of technobabble.
I think that's where
or Queen. I don't know.
Probably. Yeah, and in Star Wars, it happens rarely, if ever.
Yeah. Well, you bring up the one point that I wanted to talk about in particular is when they came up with midi-chlorians, trying to kind of give an explanation for how the magic works.
It felt so wrong.
Sure, because we all classify Star Wars as a science fantasy, and so then when they try and go the fiction route of actually explaining and giving a mechanic to this...
Ross has been peeking at my notes. I was going to make this exact point.
Were you?
Yeah. I was going to bring up midichlorians as that exact example of Star Wars feels so fantasy. Whether you think about it or not as fantasy, whether you've actually taken the time to sit here and go, fantasy, science fiction, whatever, it naturally feels so fantasy that when that element of science fiction comes in with Lucas trying to say, here's how the Force functions scientifically, we all kind of go, ugh, and we pull back from it and go, I don't like that. Don't stop it. Don't do that.
Yeah.
That it felt out of place. And which to me is a great indicator that Star Wars is fantasy. It is not science fiction.
Yeah. But my question though is, does it start to push it towards the science fiction realm? with trying to do that? Or can you
little
still
bit.
explain things and leave
Well,
it as
and-
science fantasy?
Personally, like one of the things I was going to mention in this episode as we go along, so I'll just drop it here for future references. I kind of feel like a lot of people's problems with newer Star Wars is that they're starting to push at the boundaries of science fantasy and other genre, like defining limits that people have in their heads, whether they know it or not. Where it's like we're straying into categories and areas where this isn't like I've got a very narrow, specific view of what I want Star Wars to be, what it has been. And if you stray into other areas, like with midichlorians and stuff, then I start to get upset because no, that's not this. And of course, my response to that is, well, the more Star Wars we make, the more it's gonna be that. It's gonna be everything. Because Star Wars has its genesis in large part out of Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers, these type of serials that...
Which is so interesting, because those are very science fiction.
They are attempts at science fiction.
Ooh,
but
get lawyered.
See, well, and it's like, well, what I'm saying is basically like they also very much took the route of what would be fun.
Yeah.
What would be exciting and
cool.
action-packed, rule of cool, rule of awesome, rule of fun. And it's like if it's cool enough, if it's fun and exciting enough, then yeah, let's just do it and not worry about the science. A lot of it was hand-waved as just like, well, yeah, but in the future this will be possible. So sure. And it was more about the fun, it was more about the excitement and the drama than it was about the science in any way, shape, or form. And part of that was the era where it was like, everything is possible in science. Like, we can do this. We've just made it to the moon. And we've got all this stuff going on, and there's not going to be any limits. And then, it almost feels like, not having lived through most of that, but that it almost feels like looking back, like there was this steady march of science going, well, but no. No, and also no. And no, like, yes,
there's one thing over here.
If you've read Saturday Morning Breakfast serial, the one of my favorite quotes that they have in there is left and right. It's just science ruining everything since. And I don't remember the date he chose for the beginning of science, but it's just like, and it has a picture of like a unicorn crossed out on the cover and like all these other things, and then yeah, it's. Science has been steadily going like, well, you perceived this as scientifically possible, but more and more as we've gotten away from that, it's really not. And so things that once might have fallen into a category of, oh yeah, this is science fiction, someday we'll be able to do that, are very much nowadays like, that's never going to be possible.
That's not how science works.
Sheerly, that's never going to be possible.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of stuff that was more science fiction officially has definitely begun to trend into this category of where we like it, we like the fun, and we like that anything is possible. But with modern technology and everything, looking at what we know, a lot of the fun and action-packedness of all that is not possible. And so, but we still want to do it. We don't want to stop. And that's great. That's fine by me. So I put it into this science fiction or science fantasy category where we're going. A lot of science fantasy tends to be quote-unquote retro-futuristic, where it's like we're going to take the futuristic imaginings of a previous era and we're going to run with those still because they were so fun then and they're still fun now.
Yeah.
Even though they wouldn't actually be possible. Like the BioShock games, or at least especially the earliest, the first two set in Rapture, very much this retro-futuristic design where it's like, yeah, this is the future as perceived by someone in the 50s. Mm-hmm. Even though nowadays, of course it's not going to be like, but so it gives us this simultaneous feel of being archaic and yet novel and new. It's very interesting. And so people are running a lot with things that we've now kind of discarded whether or not they're possible, but they're still fun. So why should we give them up? Yeah. Just because they're not possible? We got a science fantasy category for that, Yeah. Even Star Trek, I would say, was once more hard science fiction in the minds of most people. But over time, we've been able to look at it and look back and go, not so much, though.
Well, and I think that changes with people changing the definition of what is science fiction,
yeah,
science
that
fantasy.
Is also fair.
Because those things do evolve as we as a culture.
Part of it, too, is just the glut of entertainment media that we have and people going like, well, we need narrower and narrower categories to define what these are so that people can find exactly what they want to satisfy their particular little fetish. And so we narrow down our definitions in various ways. Once upon a time, it was just fantasy wasn't even a term. And then once, Howard and Tolkien came along and people went, oh, like, this is fantasy. But then over time, it's like, oh, well, there's high fantasy and low fantasy. There's urban fantasy. And there's secondary, there's portal fantasy, which is when you go through a door into another world. There's all sorts of definitions.
That's specific, huh?
Oh, yeah. There are multiple
excessive.
portals. There's, if you pick up...
you said that at first, though, and I thought, like the computer game?
Yeah, no. The computer game is ostensibly sci-fi. I don't know, but...
Yeah.
I guess, that would push more towards sci-fi than...
In that they're trying to explain it with science as opposed to... But
I was imagining somebody's terrible fanfic about, like, some Gladys player, relationship.
No, like, you've got Every Hearted Doorway by Seanan McGuire is a book I just read.
The cake's not a lie.
And it's literally just a story about children who wandered through doors into other worlds, like the Narnias and the Wonderlands and the Ozes and all these different places, and then came back and are having to deal with being back in the real world. And that's all it is. It's just, that's ubiquitous, that's everywhere. It's basically the response to, there's so much of this, so we're going to codify it down as this is just, and it already was its own genre, but it was basically Seanan McGuire going, you know what? I'm gonna let's write a defining portal fantasy magic system and world, and so everything gets narrowed down because people find something they like and they want more of what they like, but they don't want it to get outside of that. But especially when you've got individual creators, it becomes more and more difficult to think inside that box and still be novel. It's like, generally speaking, part of why I think it's good that George gave up Star Wars to a company that's going to bring in a lot of different people is because that way, now obviously you're going to have people arguing about what box it needs to fit into, which is what I think most of the arguments are.
That's what this episode is.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, even we're pushing the edges of other box, and that's fine. And but even within the box of what we all perceive it as, we're still going to get some new stuff, and we're going to get hopefully more novelty. But anyway,
Yeah.
I say, I like it as science fantasy. I'm happy with that particular definition.
Ross, where would you put it? What box would you put it in?
Definitely still science fantasy.
Science fantasy.
But I don't know. In my mind, science fiction is explaining away what you're doing in whatever episode, right?
Yeah.
But how far does that have to go? Because I'm also, while we've been talking, I've been thinking about Wheel of Time and how their magic system they explain, but only to a certain point. So, because they have...
I have also heard the terms used of soft fantasy and hard fantasy, where soft fantasy is fantasy where you have a magic system that's just very vague and nebulous. Gandalf doesn't...
Harry Potter.
Even Harry Potter is pretty, it's kind of middle road there, where it's like, I have a wand, I don't necessarily need a wand, because they're getting more and more specific with each iteration of more Harry Potter that we get. But it's basically like, look, hold this, point it at something, say the right word, magic happens. Whereas you compare that to Gandalf, where it's, magic is there. He sets things on fire. How? He just does when he needs to. He takes out this,
and
or he does that
when he really should.
Yeah, it's the magic. But that's Brandon Sanderson's first law of magic is your ability to solve plot problems with your magic is directly proportional to how well your audience understands that magic. So basically, if you've got soft fantasy with just very vague magic that's just mysterious and who knows what it is or what it can do, that's great. It can be a great atmosphere. But you generally don't want to use the magic to solve your plot problems because then it just feels cheap. It just goes, oh, Deus Ex Machina, the magic solved it.
Oh, like Harry Potter.
I was going to say like Avatar, James Cameron's Avatar, but yeah sure. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, you have Brandon Sanderson is, kind of the poster boy for hard fantasy in that category, where it's like, here is my magic system. Here are the known rules that we have discovered for how it works, and maybe we'll discover more that doesn't fit with that later. But it's basically just like, here's a list of metals. Here's what happens when you ingest and burn each of them. Here's a list of who can burn what and how. Like, it's all very intricately placed in rules, and he uses the magic to solve problems left and right. Which is okay because the audience knows exactly how it works.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so when it comes to the fantasy aspect...
Which I love, by the way. I love that he clearly establishes his rules and then his characters follow those rules
Yeah,
and use the
and
rules
find ways to bend and
Yes.
use it. It's like, oh, hey,
Yeah,
if
I
I
love
can do
that.
that, I can also do this, and hey, that's clever. It is a lot of fun. That's part of why it has its appeal, even though it sometimes seems odd to a lot of people. It's like, it's magic. Why do you need rules for magic? It's like, well, because it's also a plot, and plot needs structure, and if you're going to effectively do things with the magic, you have to know what you can do, and et cetera, et cetera. And so I that's where science, Star Wars and any science fantasy tends to fall a little more under the hard fantasy category, because the magic, such as it is, will have reasonably limited rules.
Ooh, but that's a good question, though. Does the Force, is it hard or soft? Because I think it's rather soft.
It's medium, I would say, because we do solve plot problems with the Force.
True, but a lot of how it's used, though, is a little sort of, well, it's the Force, so just go along with it.
We tend to not really enforce the rules on the Force. Or sometimes we don't exactly know what it's really capable of.
For example?
Well, like how every movie introduces a new Force power.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, some of like in particular, like Last Jedi, all those Force powers were grounded in stuff that we have seen before for the most part. But like Kylo freezing a blaster bolt out of the middle of the air.
Yeah.
Generally, it was kind of, at least in my mind, if you were pushing something around with the Force, it had to be like a physical object that you could push with your hand, right? So, I mean, that brings
Plasma
up...
is arguably physical in a way, but...
Yeah.
But if that blaster bolt, I could not grab it and manipulate it, right?
Yeah.
And even if it was plasma that was just stationary, if I were to grab it and move it, just what was in my hand would move, assumedly, almost like a fluid, right? It would just kind of cascade out of your hand.
Yeah,
so,
that's fair.
like with the Force, does that mean, was it actually creating a force of air, like you would talk about in Wheel of Time and pushing something up?
Oh, yeah.
Is it just reversing gravity? What?
By what means is it holding the blaster bolt?
Right.
Is what you're saying.
And so
that is definitely left very nebulous.
So before we thought the rule was just physical things, but now all of a sudden you can hold energy.
Well, see, and that is an aspect that you get into with a lot of things where it's like, that's what Brandon likes to do with his magic systems. It's like, apparently this is to a limited degree a Brandon Sanderson episode. Brandon likes,
thanks for listening.
yeah, Brandon likes to come up with an idea of, okay, I can do this, but now, what else can I do? What are the limits of this? Where does it work? Most authors do not explore the limitations and the outer limits and what their magic can and can't do to the degree that Brandon does, and which is why it's more nebulous. The Force is kind of a halfway point where it's like, we do have some hard and fast rules. We know you can move objects with the Force, period. Like, it's like you may not, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, we don't know where the outer limits of that. Where like, I look at Brandon finishing the Wheel of Time series, and one of the most Brandon things he did with that series was he created a character. I've already forgotten his name, but he's one of the Ashaman. If you're not familiar with the Wheel of Time, sorry, just buckle in for a second. And he took this guy is very weak in the magic with
the gateways.
Yeah, with the power.
It starts with an N, I think.
I think it's an A actually, but. But he has, and basically you've got a certain amount of power that you can exercise for any given person, and certain things require more power, certain things require less, and so if you've got very weak power, you can only do so much. And this guy just had this weird little quirk where he was really good at creating gateways that you could basically just open a doorway.
Andril Genhold, or Genhold.
Yeah, Andril. So there we go. So, and Andril, I haven't had the chance to ask Brandon this. I intend to at some point.
Yeah,
I am like 98% certain that Andril is 100% Brandon's creation and was never in Robert Jordan's notes anywhere, because he is so much a Brandon character. So Andril has with the magic, if you're powerful enough, you can open up just a portal in the air, a doorway to somewhere else. It's just this tear in space-time that opens up to somewhere else. And it requires a lot of power, but Andril, despite being very weak in
every other
in the
respect.
one power, he can do almost nothing with the one power. For some reason,
the one power, by the way, is the magic system in Wheel of Time.
For some reason, he can create gateways with impressive ease, and that's the only thing he can do. And so Andril's character is entirely an exercise in going, what can I do if I can just open up doorways, I think it was Psylocke style in X-Men, just wherever I want. and exploring the limits of where can I do that? How can I use that? What else? What other? And I remember listening to that, like reading those books and going, becoming curious, like what could I do with a gateway? What's around the backside of a gateway? Like if I run into the backside of a gateway, what happens? Do I run through the opposite direction?
Die or something?
I think so. I don't remember, but and then I was like, every gateway that we've ever seen in there is vertical. Can I create a horizontal one? If I am falling and I am going to hit the ground and die, can I open a portal beneath me horizontally, and then the other end opens upward so that I can, shell from portal, I can fall through that, go back up, lose until my terminal velocity is gone, and then I start falling again and just keep bouncing back and forth between those portals until I stabilize it to some degree. Would that work? I don't know. We've never seen a horizontal portal open until I think Andrel did it at some point. But again, it's the Robert Jordan did not care to explore the depths and intricate detail of how do these works. It's just, look, we can make these doors. We do get into some of the details.
And he does some of the coolest things in there.
But yeah, and that was very much that's what Brandon likes to do.
Because the portals are very sharp on the edges. If you touch them, it basically cuts you like
if you
crazy.
ran into the edge instead of through the middle, it would just slice you in half.
Yeah, and so there's this whole army of baddies coming up, and he opens up a giant portal horizontally in front of the army, and they just start cutting themselves in half as they're pushing up. It's awesome. Well, and then he starts moving the gateway down and just cuts the whole army in
Which
half.
was another moment where I was like, oh, you can move these? Since when?
Yeah, it's way cool.
Well, hadn't they already come up with the death gates, what they called them before that?
Death gates were a different thing where it opened and consumed them. Anyway.
Right.
So
boy,
now this, and so you can see how this appeals to nerd culture, though. Like nerds love to delve into like if you Google Star Trek, Star Wars, and Lord of the Rings, all sorts of things. They love to explore the limits. Like it fires people's imaginations to go. How does this work, though? What else could I do with that? Could I do this?
Just for our listeners here, how I found that character's name is I just Googled Ashaman Powerful Gateway. This was the first thing to come up.
And so the Force, they're definitely straying away from the really in-depth analysis, and it's kind of like, leave that to the fan forums. We're gonna do what Robert Jordan did with the One Power to a certain degree, where it's like, here, these are the abilities. We might delve a bit into some of the limitations of those, but we don't want to set up too many limitations because, hey, maybe we want to do that later.
Right.
Or maybe we just want to leave it mystical. We want it to be just...
Which I hope that they do. I mean, I like that it has rules, but I don't want the rules to get too... I kind of like you said, I want it to be like the middle ground there. Yeah. Like, give me some rules, but leave it open for potential stuff in the future, and don't box me in on this one.
And one of the tricky things with that approach is that the more you create, the more you're inevitably going to overwhelm people with how much you can do with this.
Yeah.
That's actually, I was thinking earlier when we were talking about some of the books, Timothy Zahn in Shadow of the Past and Vision of the Future. It's pretty clear that...
Thrawn trilogy, or...
No, the duology that was his sequel 10 years later. To the... And it was basically after, like, he wrote the definitive, like, here, welcome to the Star Wars Expanded Universe, that trilogy set 5 years after the original trilogy of movies, the Thrawn books. And then I don't think he really wrote much Star Wars after that. He might have been involved in some projects, but he did that. That was awesome.
Yeah,
and then he came back years later to write a pair of books. And it was very clear to me reading those that the object of those books was kind of to tie a bow on the expanded universes they had and kind of wrap it in closer, kind of like Last Jedi did with going, look, sure, we talked about midichlorians and we got all this, but the Force is still mystical. We want to come back to our roots, reaffirm what we've been saying about this. And that was a bit of what the Thrawn books were doing, is that Luke had been shown to be so powerful and there were so many things that he could do with the Force. And so with those books, Zahn introduced this idea that, okay, but the sheer amount of overuse of the Force that Luke has been doing, like, is almost like this abuse of power. It's in the vein of the dark side. Like, it's edging towards, like, we're going to step back and stop abusing the power. Where he's kind of got this attitude of, like, maybe I've been doing too much. Like, I just walk into a room, I can rip whatever information I need from people's minds because the plot in other stories demanded it. And eventually, so many things got done and Luke was so powerful that it got to be too much. And they went, okay, let's draw this back and go, okay, here's a reason why he's not going to use the Force so much, so that we can nerf his Superman capability.
Yes.
It's what they did with Superman midway through several times in continuity, where they're like, okay, we're going to nerf his powers a bit because this got to be too much. And so leaving the Force mystical is great because it leaves possibility, and it leaves. But the more you rely on that, you start running into the problem of it's getting to be too much. What are there any limits really? And you start to run into stories where it's like, oh, I wanted to tell this story where this, and this happens, but this new Force ability that they introduced in this random book over here would completely render all of that superfluous. Like I wouldn't, and it starts to become more and more problematic, which might just be how it goes. Because that's been their approach to science and stuff too.
So
it's just,
far,
well, you know what? If it works, it works for this story.
Since the Disney acquisition, aside from the new Force abilities seen in the new in episode 7 and 8, like in the books and in the comics and stuff, which is where you can really get into the weeds with what you can do with the Force and things like that. They've actually kept it really pretty much to what have we seen them do on screen.
Yeah, but then
they haven't really expanded it much
Russ
beyond
says
that, which
with
is nice.
The stopping plasma, like is that
right? But that's the new movie. What I'm saying is like a lot of the problems with the old EU is that you have these authors going, well, why can't the Force, grab a moon and throw it onto this planet? Awesome, let's do it.
Yeah,
and it just got too crazy. But with the new canon, with the new books and new comics, they have kept a pretty tight leash on what the Force is able to do. So far.
But you've already got fanboys complaining about Force projection as being too out there and too ridiculous. Like, oh, Luke just showing... Like, that's a major complaint that a lot of people have about The Last Jedi. And that's the thing is, everybody's got their different ideas about what should be possible, what is too far out there. And we're only a couple of years into the new canon, Give us another 15.
So I guess what I was saying with that is, I haven't seen anything that I consider to be...
I agree there. I
haven't seen any of the because you're right. Luke was Supermaning it pretty hard. There was some pretty crazy stuff where you're like, wow, really? Yeah. Really? We're going to let the Force get away with that? Yeah. But I haven't seen that in the books or the comics. And then in Force Awakens, we've seen stopping the blaster, and we've seen the ability to actually pull information from somebody's mind.
We've also seen the ability to render people unconscious with a wave of your hand.
Yes, and then
which was new.
And then the Force projection. But all those things to me feel
within
in line. Sort of kind of that
I
familiar.
Agree,
so I don't have a problem with either of those.
But some people do.
Some people are.
And that's and that's a thing that you get with both science fiction and fantasy, where it's like, well, but where are the limits? Nerds in particular, we are disposed to the mental exercises of taking something and go, wow, what else can I do with that?
Yeah.
Which leads to the innate desire to be like, well, wait, what are the limitations here? How far can I push this? And if you're not going to tell me that there is a limitation there, well, now I've got my own little fanfic in my head in a couple of years when I'm actually far enough along in my career that I can write my own Star Wars story, and I've had this cool idea in my head for years. I'm going to do it. I'm going to make it canon. And if they don't tell me that that's too far, great. But it's just going to edge the limits out there even further. I'm going to officially define that this is not where the limit is. And that it just keeps creeping. So that could happen. It'll be interesting to see where they go. It'll be interesting to see how long they go before they decide they need a new reset.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you get those where, and that's again, it's this idea of some people want it to be harder fantasy, some people want it to be softer fantasy, some people want it to be harder sci-fi, some people want it to remain softer sci-fi. It's
when really what we need is to just give me Kyler exactly what I want.
Naturally, that's what everybody needs.
Yes, that's what everyone.
We just need an AI so advanced that it can create the perfect story for absolutely everyone. And then we can all have our own personal... But see, that's the thing, though, is once you have your own personalized story of Star Wars for everyone, then nobody will have Star Wars as a cultural touchstone, because everybody has a different Star Wars.
What a travesty
Chris,
that would be.
There's a sci-fi story for you to write. AI that can make stories for everyone.
I feel like it would be a little close to something that Eric James Stone has already done, which was a delightful little story where his friend makes this quantum computer that can... Basically, it prints out a story that... on viewing, I'm sorry, Eric, I'm going to spoil your story here for everyone, but you should still go read it because it's hilarious. Go pick up Rejiggering the Thingamajigger by Eric James Stone. It's a delightful collection of short stories by Eric James Stone. I highly recommend. But he's got one particularly, it's one of the shortest ones in there, and it's basically a gag, so I'm sure he won't mind me spoiling it. If you don't want to hear spoilers, you go ahead and go away now for like the next 30 seconds. But so it's this story where it's this guy, he's trying to get published and he never can, and his friend's like, well, I've just built this quantum supercomputer, basically, that it's going to take advantage of quantum mechanics to create this suspended state of the story that it's printed out, but until someone looks at it, it won't officially collapse into one specific story. So it will, as soon as someone looks at it, it will become the perfect story for them. So you'll be able to get published. And so he goes, okay, I guess that seems kind of dishonest, though. And he's just like, we'll do it as an experiment. So I don't remember exactly how it went. So he sends it out to a magazine. He can't even look at it, so he doesn't know what it is. And then he gets a letter back. It's another rejection. And the guy's just like, this story was amazing. It was beautiful. It was wonderful. I apologize, Eric. I can't remember what story he referenced, but it's just like, but what made you think you could get away with submitting a word-for-word copy of Robert E. Heinlein's something, something, something to me? and so that was the joke. But it's like, yeah, if you're submitting something that's absolutely perfect for everyone who reads it, then everyone's going to have something different. So yeah, I don't have much more to say about it than that delightful joke from Eric James Stone. So
there you go.
Go pick up his stories; they're delightful.
So I think we've had, I don't know that we've come to a conclusion or defined it.
I feel we've all
but we've had a good discussion about
science
fiction versus fantasy. I think we've had a good discussion.
And I think as far as that goes, it might be best to leave it up to our listeners to what they
feel. Again, because like Chris was just saying with the story, everybody is going to be a little bit different in, first off, where they place Star Wars. Both of you said science fantasy. I'm still leaning more towards pure fantasy, like a low fantasy, you know, that just happens to be taking place in space.
Yep.
So you listeners are all going to have your own version of where you're putting that, but also, I forgot what else I was going to say. Anyway, but there it is.
And also on the other side of things is everyone has their own idea of what it should be.
Yes, that was what I was going to say.
So everyone, you've got certain people that's like, I want it to remain right in the box where it always has been, but you've got other people that is like, I want to edge it over here just a little bit more. That's what I've always wanted.
So for those of you that completely agree with me, let us know so that I can feel good about myself.
What are you talking? Everybody agrees with me, though.
Yeah, no. So the next thing, Ross was holding in a snide remark.
I was.
Go ahead. Ross? Come on, man.
And for the listeners that agree with me, we can all just be happy and let them all agree with themselves. You can agree with whoever you want.
Sure.
So,
as long as it's
what fun is
I
this?
commit to not commit.
Oh, I approve of that stance.
So then the next thing that we had discussed, and this was actually the sort of origin of this episode, that we then decided would probably be too small for a regular episode, so we added the science fiction versus fantasy.
But, well, hold on. Looking at how long it took us to discuss the first part, I mean, we're doing good. I think this will actually be a little bit shorter discussion, though.
Okay. Yeah. I do too.
Well, I can go on at length, but...
Anyway, so we wanted to pose the question to ourselves and to you, the listener. Is Star Wars a children's movie, or is it more for adults? Is this a show for kids, or is it for adults? Like, who's the target audience with Star Wars originally, and also here in 2018? We've got movies, but we also have shows appearing on Disney Channel. So, like, who is Star Wars for?
My short answer to the question, is Star Wars for kids or for adults, is yes.
I would agree. It's...
Well, and I'm with Chris. Yeah, definitely it has the elements of both. George doesn't think so.
Yeah, and that's... Yeah.
Well, doesn't he?
Well,
he's physically said it's for kids.
He has
but I would say that he was like... I would say that George was fighting against this attitude of, no, it's for the people who it was originally for. It has to grow up with us. And him saying, no, this has always been a thing for kids, too. Like, it's for everybody. It's the monomyth, you know? He's trying to create something that resonates across all ages and groups. And
yeah, I mean, we've got the word of the creator saying this is a kid's show. Well, and Star Wars is for kids.
In our episode where we talked about his inspirations, we said that he was trying to write something that he liked or would have liked as a kid.
Right. Well, and his inspiration is Buck Rogers, which he watched as a kid.
Right.
And he's saying, I want that feeling for others.
So it's a huge nostalgia trip.
It is.
Yeah.
for George.
And it clearly is for the three of us as well. I mean, whenever I watch Star Wars, I am that little kid again, sitting in front of the TV watching Star Wars, and still, and I'm an adult, I have kids of my own now, but it makes that little inner child of mine just giddy, to watch Star Wars. But at the same time, I'm also now an adult with children of my own, and I still love it. I love it just as much. So it's a little, I think, going back to previous episode, or what was it, I can't remember when we did this episode, but whatever one where we talked about the origins of Star Wars, or the inspiration, right? The monomyth, as Chris has mentioned a couple times. It's the monomyth for a reason, right? It's because it resonates from the youngest age where you start understanding what a story is to the person on their deathbed. I mean, and every age and moment in between, the monomyth resonates with you. That's the point of the monomyth, and where Lucas intentionally set out to do that. And yeah, he had some fun things. He's got flashy laser swords and whatever else, which resonates for the kids whose attention spans are not great. But the monomyth, the underlying story, right, that appeals to adults.
Appeals to everyone.
Appeals to everyone, and so kids might not understand all the finery of the monomyth and the intricate details and all of the different sort of layers and levels of that metaphor, but it's still there, on that intrinsic level. But yeah, I don't know. So it's
I think you're touching on a point that I wanted to touch on. We should separate the monomyth from the other things that you can gain from Star Wars. I mean, the monomyth is just about that progression, the hero from nothing to success.
Hero,
yeah. But also, there are lots of other themes that you can pick up in Star Wars, other examples that you can take from little grains of wisdom, or examples of maybe how to improve your own life, which I think is something that fantasy has a tendency to do, right?
But isn't that the purpose of the monomyth anyway? I mean, you look at the most ancient stories that we have that sort of built the foundation for the monomyth, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Iliad, the Odyssey. Aren't these also, though, instructional stories of saying, look, here's how this hero became great and became good.
Here's how this hero's hubris led to his downfall.
And so if you apply the hero's good traits to yourself, you will become similar to the hero's good traits. Or if you avoid the hero's pitfalls, that caused him destruction, you may avoid destruction in your own life. I mean, but is that not the point of the monomyth? And so you may have the overall story, which is teaching an overall moral, in Star Wars, right? Maintain control of your feelings, don't go to the dark side, don't let yourself be consumed by anger and hatred, right? That's sort of like one of the big things, right, in the original trilogy, where then you might also, along the way, find little pebbles of wisdom from, Yoda saying, something like, one example for me, when Yoda and Luke are on Dagobah, Yoda tells Luke to pull the X-Wing out of the swamp. And he says, I can't, it's too big. Yoda reaches forth his little hand and pulls it out. And Luke says, I can't believe it. And Yoda turns to him and says, that is why you fail.
Yeah.
And I remember watching that. I was probably like 10 or 12, somewhere in there. The first time that I really caught the meaning of that line. And I thought, holy crap. He's exactly right. Whatever we do in life, I mean, if you go into it thinking, I can't do this, you are that much more likely to fail. And if you go into it thinking, it may be difficult, but sure, I can give it a shot, I can do this, you're that much more likely to succeed. Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. And he is 100% right on that. And so
Some people get lucky.
Yeah, well, and that's true.
And some people have bad luck.
That's true, but generally speaking, though, if you go into a situation with a defeatist mentality, you're going to be defeated pretty much.
I'm being pedantic there.
Yeah, and so you might find those little nuggets along the way of the overarching story, but that's still a part of the monomyth as far as I see it. I mean, Odysseus doesn't learn his lesson he learns his lesson over the whole thing, but he learns it through little examples here and there on each island that he visits in every land and people he encounters, right?
And in any example I can think of, it seems to be that, yes, the hero's journey does tend to be a vehicle for a great number of lessons. It's one thing why I like the recent turn that the comic book movies have taken, or at least Marvel in particular. DC doesn't do it as well. Because, like there is in Star Wars, there's always something you can pick out from those characters that, is great. Great power comes great responsibility. You know, the best one that Marvel has probably ever come up with, again, still sits in the framework of the hero's journey. All of them do that. All of the Marvel movies are the same way. But it just seems that I forgot where I was going with that.
I can spin off of that if you want.
Please do. 'Cause
Okay.
I'm completely stopped up.
Well, I was going to step in. I was just thinking about, but one of the problems with defining this particular element of any story is that our society and many other societies around the globe have fairly arbitrary ideas about what is for children and what is for adults.
Yeah.
It's like I look at animation. It's like people in the U.S. Western culture in particular tend to go, animation is for kids, live action is for adults,
Right.
which is why people are so happy about all the live action Disney movies because, now it's more grown up. When in fact, when I watched those, I actually watched some clips of the live action Beauty and the Beast last night so that I could actually definitively say from my own experience whether or not, compare these two to each other. That it's massively inferior. Like it's worse writing, it's worse. It's just everything about it is so comparatively just can't live up to the original.
Yes.
And now part of that could obviously be my nostalgia for the original, but part of it I'm just trying to be objective as a writer, and I'm looking and I'm going, everything you're doing here is responsive and stale and just dull. Like it's not. This is not
Save it
creation.
for our Beauty and the Beast episode.
Sure, yeah, our Beauty and our Beauty and the Beast Star Wars episode. It's about Leia and Chewie.
Oh yes, I can't wait.
Or Leia killing Jabba. Take your pick. Anyway, that's gonna be fun. Anyway,
Derailed.
but
Sorry,
yeah.
guys.
So there's the idea that animation is for children is absolutely arbitrary. If you go over to Japan, that does not exist there.
Yeah.
Anime is for any age, and you basically just have to treat it for live action. Some of this will be for kids, some of this will not be. And you have to be discerning and pay attention to figure out which is which, where people on this side of the pond really want to just arbitrarily say, nah, if it's animated, it's for kids, then that's a lot easier for me. But it's not true. And animation has its own strengths and weaknesses that it plays well to, and live action has its.
Unlike the really, excellent live action Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, which, because it's live action, must be for
exactly,
adults.
exactly. It's like, but I think
understand that reference.
I never actually
It's a Disney
saw it.
Channel
I was
show.
just trying to
Okay.
think of a Disney Channel show that I knew was live action. That was the first one that came to mind.
So the delineation between what is for kids and what is for adults is fairly arbitrary, but I think what I see a lot of people pointing to, particularly when they're arguing about Star Wars, maybe they're not outwardly saying these things, but I think what a lot of it comes down to for a lot of people is simple morals, like, that, which is again hard to define. You look at these ancient epics, the whole concept of hubris, it can be distilled down to a fairly simple moral. Be arrogant and proud, you're going to fail, you're going to come crashing down, and it'll be your own fault, is basically how hubris distills most of the time. Whereas more adult things tend to, they're delving into grays and complexities, and they might not give clear answers, and that's being an adult. And I'm like, no, that's still arbitrary. Adults can have simple truisms. Simple truisms can be very important and useful guides in life. Everybody can generally, whether they believe in a religion or they don't, or whatever religion they might belong to or not belong to, they can generally distill certain amounts of their personal beliefs into some very basic, straightforward truisms for life. This is a good way to act, and this is not. That is not an immature thing to do. That's just human nature. Our minds can only really distill so much through so many grays before trying to reach for some familiar touchstone that they can hold on to. And so when I see a lot of people complaining, it's like, would they point at Star Wars as for kids, whereas Star Trek is more for adults, because Star Trek is addressing issues, and Star Wars is moralizing, they might say. Which I feel is in itself simplistic way to break things down, and simplistically almost childish way to break things down.
Well, and what's the difference?
I'd say the difference is basically the type of issues that we're tackling, like how hard and complex are they, how dark do they get, and B, how definitive an answer do we give? Do we say that is why you fail? Boom. Wrap a nice little bow on that particular moral. Still powerful, still great, but it's not as adult as going, look at all the grays of this issue, and those are sure there, aren't they? Be nice if someone else could solve that, but I'm too mature to actually try and claim that there's any way to solve anything. which is a very patronizing way of looking at the adult, quote unquote, writing. And, from my perspective, a lot of the times when people are going, no, I'm not going to try and tell anyone what they should be doing, that's just intellectual cowardice, in my opinion. As a lot of the times it's people going back, well, I'm not smart enough to solve this. Really, I think I am, but I'm going to. But, that's not what intellectual people do. Which isn't necessarily... It's good to be able to look at stuff and, an educated mind is one that can entertain an idea without either outwardly accepting or rejecting it. Like, that's a good thing to be able to do, but it's also good to approach things and go, no, there is a solution here. Mm-hmm. Next to nobody is pointing at the issue of racism and going, well, but this is kind of a gray area, isn't it? Let's just leave it. It's like, no, it's bad. Period. It's a thing that people do. You could delve into the gray areas of how culpable are people for things that they've learned from a young age and had impressed upon their minds by people they trust. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a lot of gray areas you can get into, and that would all be considered more adult. Whereas a simplistic moralizing would be, racism is bad, and that's all I'm going to say on the issue. But I don't feel like that's what Star Wars has ever quite been doing. I feel like there's always been some depth and gray to that.
Well, and actually, you did
the very fact that Darth Vader gets redeemed, that he chooses to leave the dark side, it's in and of itself an approach to being like, we're not going to just be simple good is good is good and evil is evil. People can walk a line. They can walk across that line.
Only a Sith deals in absolutes.
Right. Anyway.
You did remind me of where I did want to go.
Cool.
So fantasy and Marvel and Star Wars. Yeah, no, I just, because my looking for examples of how to illustrate this, I forget what I was trying to illustrate.
Not to mention, Ross isn't feeling well, so he's heavily drugged at the moment.
No, we're good now. We're back. I'm okay. Fire
the drugs worn off.
Don't derail me again. I know. So Marvel, Star Wars, fantasy in general tends to, in our society these days, fill the role that fairy tales have as a culture growing up.
Absolutely.
Fairy tales were a fantasy set story that were meant to teach a lesson.
Yep.
Right?
Ooh, can we go meta real quick?
Let me finish.
Okay. Yeah. I almost derailed him again, guys.
I have to fight so hard to talk.
I wish you guys could see Ross. He shakes his fist at me.
I do.
Filling the roles of fairy tales.
Well, and it was a lot, just mostly what you were getting at with yours, is that Star Wars gives us a good framework to teach us a simple principle that we can then take and apply through
to a wider variety of experiences.
Right, so that we can come up with those answers. But that also kind of takes me back to our last topic of maybe that's why they are for kids, so that you can actually give them an example of a principle to impress upon the child that they can then take on, like you did for me with anger.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah. I don't know.
I was just going to go meta and say, the fairy tales, right? Fantasy, but we use them to teach the kids. Except these fairy tales were projections of the real world around them, much like science fiction is. Because, you had all these fairy tales, like Little Red Riding Hood. Yeah, except wolves in the forest of Germany are a real thing that you got to deal with. So when you're telling your kids about Little Red Riding Hood who went into the forest and didn't listen to mom,
right?
She got ate by a wolf. You kids better listen. Those kids are going, yeah, this is the real world that I live in. This is a thing that could potentially happen. So that's actually a little bit more like science fiction. Ooh.
Well, one of my favorite quotes is from C.S. Lewis. It's, "When I became a man, I put away childish things, including the fear of childishness and the desire to be very grown up." And I love that quote because...
That quote goes on?
Yeah.
Everyone always stops at, I put away the childish
things. Well, that's
things.
Because that's from, the New Testament.
Well, I put away childish things is, I think New Testament, Shakespeare quoted it. It's all over.
But, Lewis just added his
It was him
Lewis
going...
flair to it.
Yeah, so it's in...
Lewisian flair?
I think it's... I've never seen his name used as an adjective, actually. I wish
we gotta work on
it. But yeah, I think it's a very valid point, is that there's a lot of people who approach things and go, oh, no, that's childish, so I'm not going to do it. I don't want to be seen as childish, which is in itself kind of childish. It's like, and that's the thing, is like, I explained on the Last Jedi episode, that I really love that The Last Jedi is going, here's some grays. Grays can be a thing here, but that doesn't mean that the blacks and whites aren't things either. Like, ignoring the reality of black and white is not mature. It's just its own form of childishness. Morals and moralizing play an important part in any society. We need morals to function as a society and not shatter apart and just start murdering each other. That's not just me, right? Okay, anyway. But no, it's all important things. Sharing information through stories is important. Examining gray areas is also important. Mm-hmm. And I will say that when it comes to really examining gray areas, without moralizing, just looking at that is an important thing to do, is examining, hey, look, this is very complex, and yeah, there isn't necessarily a real solution right now. I'm just trying to get out there that, like, let's look at this realistically. Let's not oversimplify this as good and evil, when in reality it's a whole bunch of people being not good or evil and kind of being floundering around in the middle. That's very important. It's a good thing to do. And it's not something that Star Wars has traditionally really done. And I would say that is probably the single most central element that leads to this being for children, or at least a major one, is we're not really trying to be gray. We're not trying to examine complexity. We're trying to teach lessons. We're trying to show a better side and help people see this is how you be a good person, which is something, very classically fairy tale-ish, very classical, these Odysseys and Iliads and Beowulfs and all these grand epics, that these cultural tales that had an inherent simple, this is who we are and what we try to be. And so I think that's one of the things with Last Jedi that turned off a lot of people, is that it's wading into grayer territories than it has before, which a lot of people want to dismiss as just being intellectual cowardly, like I said earlier, where a lot of the time I feel like that's what people are doing when they refuse to actually comment on a solution to a problem they're raising, or they dismiss it as being preachy. It's like, oh, you're trying to go into all this other stuff when really it's just black and white. Come on. Which is problematic thinking in some ways. There is gray left and right. And so bringing that into Star Wars, I don't think is a bad thing. And it's something a lot of people really want. A lot of people want Star Wars. They love Star Wars. They have since they were kids, but they've also learned to love, really, they've learned to love literature. They've learned to love Game of Thrones. Some people, I'm sure there are some people out there that I just want Game of Thrones, but with Star Wars over the cover. Give me all of the violence and the sex and the incest and the disgustingness.
Minus the sex and the incest, but the violence with a Star Wars, I would be
a lot of people really do. And that I think is a valid line to draw, where it's like, is this for kids? Yes. And while we may branch out, we will be branching out more and more, and Star Wars will become more things. Maybe we will make Star Wars that is not for kids.
Ooh.
And we'll make Star Wars that is... We already are making Star Wars that isn't really for adults. That is definitely on the childish side of things. But right now, so far, it's definitely trying to straddle a line. Especially as they're trying to please older fans and draw younger
I
ones.
wonder about that as well. I think it will be after we... No. Anyway, Mandalorian. Jon Favreau's Mandalorian, I think... Because, the on the more for kids end of the spectrum here, I think you would say Clone Wars, Rebels, Resistance, right? Sure. The TV shows tend to be more for kids. They're on the Disney Channel, for heaven's sakes.
I would also go into kids books and the like.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking the movie.
Also,
TV
the
stuff,
bad lip reading Yoda song as delightful.
Oh, it's so good. Oh, so good. But I think something like The Mandalorian, that may be on maybe this isn't so much for kids.
Yeah.
Depending on, obviously we don't know what the tone of the show is going to be, but it has that potential to be a little more for the adults.
See, and that's, again, the more you expand it, the more it's going to go. Eventually, Star Wars is going to produce a Logan or a Dark Knight.
Or it's just...
Or a Deadpool. Those are going to come along. As long as we're making more Star Wars, we're going to branch out more and more. We're gonna have a rated R Star Wars movie someday.
Oh, I hope not.
And it's gonna happen though. A lot of the people who have been unhappy with the current iterations of Star Wars are going to be very pleased by that, and a lot of people aren't. I don't relish the idea of a rated R Star Wars movie. I don't want Star Wars to go into that.
It's the exact same debate that they had with Deadpool, how you had all these comic book characters for kids, and then all of a sudden you're making a rated R movie that parents don't want to take their kids to.
Yeah.
Right? It'll be the exact same debate when that happens.
And that's why I think they should maybe avoid that. Also because as a parent now, I enjoy watching Star Wars with my kids, but also because it is the modern fairy tale. Yeah. It is an instructional thing that they enjoy, so they're paying attention to the story and the consequences of your actions in that story, so that when I go, hey kids, maybe don't do that. Remember how when Luke does this, or when Kylo does this, how it doesn't, and then my kids have that touchstone and they go, oh, right, okay, And so I would hate to lose out on that because they've upped the game so much.
But here's the thing. As long as there is a significant enough segment of the audience that does want that, someday it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, and also Disney's already set the precedent with Deadpool.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Well, that wasn't Disney.
No,
that was Fox. Disney now has purchased Fox's assets, so we'll see what they do with Deadpool. And the PG-13 version of Deadpool 2 coming out may point to what they're going to do. They might just produce two versions of a film to please both sides of the fandom, which would be a really interesting approach.
That would be interesting, although with Deadpool specifically, they could have, because of who Deadpool is, they could have done a PG-13 where he's always about to say something or do something and then hold himself back to be like, oh, got to keep that rating because he breaks the fourth wall. But that's another.
I'm sure that's what's going to happen.
Episode.
Yeah. But as long as there is a significant enough market segment that wants that is clamoring for more grimness, more dark, more grimdark, someone's going to produce it sometime. And I've seen what DC seems to be trying to do lately. I read an article talking about how they seem to be shying away from the whole expanded universe concept and trying to be really. And they're trying to go the direction of more prestige projects, where they want to produce. It's like, it's okay if we produce some Marvel-esque movies where it's light and it's happy, and even the darkest moments they're not Game of Thrones by any means. But it's also okay if we produce some Logans. Logan gets a lot of praise. It's a well-made movie, and it's.
Well, and so do the Deadpools, for that matter.
Yeah, the Deadpool, but it's a different kind of praise. Logan is praised for being artistic. Logan is praised for depth and moral ambiguity and all these different things. It's praised as a work of art and not just as a comic book movie. People say it's elevating comic book movies as though that, and I look at that and go, they don't need to be elevated. They're already pretty great. If you're just looking at this as something that needs elevating, then why are you even commenting on it? Right. You don't need to be here. But and Dark Knight is another one where it's like Dark Knight is some intricate story crafting and moralizing and teaching and all, like, it's very, very intricately done. Last Jedi for me is not quite Dark Knight levels of that, but it's definitely pushing a lot closer to that than any Star Wars has before, which for a lot of fans is like, especially if they don't like what they're being told, and that's its own factor, where a lot of people is just like, no, Star Wars tells me the things I like to hear. I don't want people who are going to tell me things that I don't like to hear making Star Wars, is basically the essence of a lot of people's arguments. And, well, it's going to be everything, but... Yeah. And so I'm intrigued by DC taking a bit more of that approach. And I feel like that's a bit of what Disney's going to try and do with Star Wars, where they're going to go, you know what? Give Jon Favreau a miniseries here, and let's see how that goes. Let him do his thing. Give Rian Johnson a trilogy over here. Let's see what he does with that. Let's just give everyone everything. I wouldn't be surprised if the main trilogies, so to speak, the heart of the Star Wars universe as they're currently functioning, were more, they tried to keep them more traditionally Star Wars, and, they might become more watered down and people get tired of them, kind of like they're starting to get tired of Marvel. Or they could, and while they do prestige projects off to the side to see what snags what audience and what people like, and it could become a lot of things. But all in all, I personally say so far, Star Wars is for kids and adults, and that's fine. It doesn't have to be one or the other. But there are definitely avenues you can take that are just for adults, and it has not gone down those yet, whereas some other major franchises have or might. And I don't know if I want to see it do that, but I feel like it's inevitable that it will. It's inevitable.
Well, I think we've kind of rounded out that discussion.
Well, final verdicts. I think a concise...
Sure.
Yeah, let's give us
all right.
Back to the black and whites.
3 sentences. Yeah, 3 sentences on what. Just sum up what you had to say and why your reasonings are.
Cool.
For The whole
For these-
episode, or
both of
for
these?
No,
kids?
for this,
Okay.
for kids.
Oh, for kids. I think I just did that, so you go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. Like Chris, actually, no, that's right. You did yours at the beginning. The answer is yes. It is for kids and adults. But my point of there, at least for me, the point of learning things from the movies and why they would be for kids, we as adults can also learn from a refresher on those topics.
Absolutely.
So, and also, I mean, with them getting deeper, they will do a better job at teaching lessons or pointing new things out to you that you may not have considered before. So, yes, absolutely for kids, but also for adults.
Yep. Yeah, I'm gonna be a moral coward, as Chris would say. Let you decide for yourself. No, I'm just kidding.
Coward!
No, I'm just kidding. No, absolutely. Like these other two guys have said, it is for kids, but it is also for adults. I would probably lean like 55% adult, 45 kids, but it's right there in the middle. I mean, like Ross just said, there are lessons to be learned for kids. There are even better lessons to be learned for adults, and greater appreciation, I think, for adults, if you're looking for it. Overall, yeah, so I'd say it's yes on... Yeah, is it for kids or adults? Yes. Is it science fiction or is it fantasy? Yes. Though for me, more fantasy than sci-fi for sure.
Well, and generally, I think a lot
is.
of people arguing about where it goes is where they want it to go.
Right.
And that's a thing, too, where it's like, well, should it go somewhere else? Should it not? That's hard to say. If you want it to go so far afield that it would almost be unrecognizable from where it is, maybe just go make your own. You know,
Yeah,
just like, you know,
like Lucas
make
did.
a Firefly. Yeah, make your own Flash Gordon. You know,
Yeah.
that's always an option, too.
And honestly, I think this episode, more than perhaps any other that we've done recently, leaves room for a lot of really good discussion
Yeah.
for people.
Definitely.
So please...
Because we're moral cowards.
Yes, don't be moral cowards, dang
I
it.
am okay with discussion and being left open to discussion.
Yeah, so please let us
sometimes.
know, though, because I would actually be really interested in knowing what our tens of listeners think
Yes.
about this.
Or if you're
topic.
listening to this 5 years in the future, our tens of thousands of listeners, because
Yeah.
it's going to happen. We believe we
Of course,
can.
that's
But
right.
really, though, if you are listening to this later than when it airs, bring up the conversation again.
Bring it up.
Start it up again. Because really, I would be very interested to know what people think, where
Yeah,
people
me too.
categorize Star Wars.
Yep.
So, with that, I think we're going to call it a day. And just let you guys know, next week, we are going to return to the prequels for just a minute. And you see, Ross and I were talking about how clearly episode 1... well, anyway, we... basically, Ross and I ended up on different sides of the argument of which prequel movie is worse, episode 1 or episode 2. Not which is better, not one we like, just which one is worse.
Now,
of a
obviously,
movie.
it's episode 3. But
Oh.
No, episode 3 is the best.
Advocate.
And anyway,
No,
so
no.
we are going to...
Opposition.
We're going to invite you all to turn in next week and find out why Ross is wrong.
Or tune in next week, whichever you
What
prefer.
did I say?
Turn.
Yeah. Whatever. As you're listening to bed, when you turn your in for the night, go ahead and pop our podcast on.
Yeah.
No,
Let our soothing voices
soothing voices.
soothe you off to sleep.
Yeah, no. So show up next week and let us entertain you with our adequacy. So, yeah, be sure to follow us on Twitter, and please, please, please join our Facebook group, A More Civilized Podcast, and let us know what you're thinking, especially about this episode. I'm very interested in knowing what people think.
Don't forget about our website, where you can find all of our episodes, amorecivilizedpodcast.podbean.com. You can talk to me on Twitter at Mr_R_star.
You can find me on Twitter at itinerant
Oh,
Baxter. I
almost
almost
again.
relapsed there. And also, please let us know if there is anywhere you want to find our podcast, but currently cannot, or if there are any burning topics that you absolutely want to hear us pontificate upon or argue about.
Yes.
Please let us know, and we would love to have fodder for future episodes.
Indeed.
So, thank you all for listening, and may the force be with you all.
Always.
I'm Anna Graves, and thank you for listening to A More Civilized Podcast.
He's like
we're back. We're back. I'm okay. Fire
The drugs worn off.
Don't derail me again.